The world grows quiet, and the story begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Sounds of Stories. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Sounds of Stories. If you've been following my work over on Dark Margins, which is another YouTube channel or a podcast, it's a channel about revenge and what revenge does psychologically to us. If you've been following that, you may remember a recent episode exploring how revenge can become its own prison. The episode actually was inspired by one of Charles Dickens' greatest novels, Great Expectations. And while researching Dickens' life and writing, I was reminded that there was far more to him than many people realize. Behind the memorable characters and the timeless classics was a writer who wasn't afraid to venture into fear, guilt, obsession, as well as the supernatural. Few stories revealed that side of Dickens more vividly than The Signalman. The story was written after Dickens survived a devastating railway disaster, and this haunting tale asks a question that still unsettles readers more than a century later. What if the warning comes, but no one knows how to stop it coming? For tonight's journey, I've reimagined this Victorian classic for the modern world, where signal lamps have become surveillance cameras, lonely watchmen have become the last human operators, and the darkness beneath the city is every bit as mysterious as it was in Dickens' day. So, dim the lights, settle in, and let the pages turn. The reimagining of The Signalman, written by Charles Dickens. I found him the way you find things underground, by going down further than you meant to. I was writing a piece, human interest, my editor called it, the last man's signal booth on the deep metro line. A man who watched screens in a hole while the rest of the city moved above him. I had my recorder, my press pass, and a story I thought I already knew the shape of. Well, I was wrong about that shape. There was a maintenance grate above the platform. I could see him below, a single figure standing at the edge of the light, perfectly still. The way he stood, I don't know how to explain it. It was like a man listening for something that the rest of us had stopped being able to hear. I leaned over the grating and called out, "Hello, below there." He didn't look up immediately, but when he did, his face carried something I couldn't name. It wasn't fear or annoyance, but it was something older than that. It was like a man who had been expecting a visitor, but was uncertain whether this visitor was the right one. I descended the maintenance stairs, and it was longer than I expected. It was the kind of depth that makes you recalibrate your sense of the city above. The platform was narrow, the ceiling low, and the air was cool and pressurized in a way that reminded you constantly of how much earth was overhead. The man's name was Dara. He shook my hand with a careful grip, like he hadn't shaken many hands often. He led me to the booth without much ceremony. The booth was smaller than I anticipated, but it still had banks of monitors, it had a keyboard, it even had a logbook with dense and precise handwriting. In fact, every entry was the same size, the same pressure, as though emotion had been deliberately excluded from the act of record-keeping. There was a red warning light at the tunnel mouth, visible through the window. There was an intercom bell above the door. There was a camera feed, 16 screens in a 4x4 grid, showing every inch of the deep line. He had labeled each one by hand. Camera 1, Camera 2, and in the bottom right corner of the grid, Camera 7. Now, to get a better picture of what Dara was going through, Dara had worked alone for 11 years. The transit authority kept him on a formality. It was a holdover from the union contract signed before the line was fully automated. His job was simply to watch screens and file reports. He showed me the reports once, a little bit later. 17 of them, every one closed with the same notation: operator experiencing isolation-related stress. Monitoring recommended. I'd asked how he'd ended up here. He said it suited him. I asked him if he liked it. He considered the question for a long time before deciding not to answer it. While we were talking, the intercom bell rang. Just once, a single clean tone. Dara's eyes moved to the tunnel mouth window, just one quick practice glance. Then he returned to me. His expression hadn't changed. I asked what that was. He said, "A train, southbound, on schedule." Well, the train came, and it was on schedule. But I had been watching him, and I had noticed the bell had rung before the system announced the train, before any sensor had triggered it. I noted that. I told myself it was just a coincidence. I told myself that for 3 days. I went back the next evening. I told myself it was for the story. I had a follow-up question. It was a detail I had missed. I didn't examine the telling too closely. Dara was at his monitors. He looked up when I descended, unsurprised, and said simply, "Sit down. I want to show you something. Tell me what you think about this, honestly." He pointed to camera 7, the bottom right screen. The camera covered the north tunnel mouth, he explained. 200 meters of track before the curve. It was the only section of the deep line not covered by an automated sensor array. It was a gap in the system that had been pending repair for 6 years and would, in all likelihood, be pending for 6 more. He opened the logbook. In the margin of the logbook was an entry from 14 months earlier, and there was a sketch. It was small, precise, like everything Dara did. It was the sketch of a figure, arms raised, the posture of someone trying urgently to stop something. It appeared on camera 7, he said, at irregular intervals. Always at the edge of the red warning light, always before something happened on the line. "The first time," he said, "I was warned of something. I didn't understand the warning." He had seen the figure. He hadn't known what it meant, but 3 days later, a woman fell on the tracks at platform 9. Unfortunately, she did not survive. I said that could be coincidence. He said yes. Then he told me about the second time. The bell had rung before the intercom was triggered, just as I had noticed on my first visit. He reported a fault, but maintenance found nothing. 3 days after that, a coupling failure on the northbound. 4 people ended up in the hospital. The third time, he had warned of a fire in the ventilation shaft, eastbound platform. The evacuation had happened in time because he had been warned. 7 times in total, he said. Each time, something had followed. The bell had rung again that morning. I stared at camera 7. The screen showed empty tunnel, the red glow of the warning light, but nothing else. And then, it didn't. There was a figure at the edge of the light, arms raised, urgent, desperate, the gesture of someone trying to stop something already in motion. I stood up. I said, "There's someone there. We have to call." And Dara said quietly that he had called. The maintenance had checked, but there was no one there. I looked back at camera 7. The figure was gone. Later, I checked the footage myself. I watched camera 7 for 2 hours. There was nothing on the recording. No anomaly, no figure, just empty tunnel and red light. But I had seen it, and I know what I saw. I have no explanation for both of those things being true at once, but I've stopped trying to find that explanation. I went back a third time. I couldn't not go back. I knew that, the way you know things that have already been decided without you. But there Dara was, standing outside the booth when I arrived, facing the tunnel mouth, his back to me. He was utterly still. I said his name twice before he answered. He said he'd heard me, but he still hadn't turned around. When he did finally turn around, I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't fear. Dara didn't seem to have an easy relationship with fear. But it was something adjacent to fear. It was a readiness. It was the look of a man who had been bracing for something for a very long time and has begun to suspect that the bracing is itself the problem. He told me there was a new trouble. When the figure appeared now, it covered its face. He demonstrated, raised both hands to his own face, fingers spread, the gesture half concealment, half grief. And it was calling out, he said. He couldn't hear the words over the trains, but he had studied the recording, frame by frame. He could read the motion of it. It was saying, "For God's sakes, clear the way." I tried the rational approach. It could be that Dara has had 11 years of solitary shifts. He's had documented isolation effects. He's had the well-understood relationship between sustained aloneness and perceptual distortion. And I said all of it as gently as I could. To my surprise, he actually let me finish. Then he said, "I've asked myself every question you're asking, and I've asked them for 11 years. Dara had an engineering degree. He understood optics, stress responses, the architecture of delusion. He had written down every rational explanation he could construct, and he had a file for them. And that file was thicker than his incident log. And none of them accounted for the things that had followed each warning. The woman on Platform 9, the coupling failure, the fire. And then he asked me the question I hadn't been able to answer since. What is the purpose of a warning you cannot use? He had filed 17 reports. He had gone to his supervisor. He had gone to occupational health. He had been cleared for duty each time, which he had expected, because there was nothing wrong with them. That, he said, was precisely the problem. If there was something wrong with them, the warnings would be symptoms, but they would mean nothing, and he could stop watching. But he was healthy. The warnings actually meant something. He couldn't stop watching, and whatever he did, whatever he reported, whatever noise he made, something happened anyway. To that, I had no answer, and I still don't. But I returned to my life. I filed a different story. I called an old friend and had a conversation I already knew how to have. I went to a bar and left at the right moments. I slept with the light on. And then, out of nowhere, I researched Dara. 11 years before the tunnel, there had been a traffic accident, a road crossing on the south side of the city. Dara had been in the car behind. He had seen the collision, run to help. There was a woman, and he held her hand while the emergency services were called. Unfortunately, she never made it. There was a quote in the local paper from that week. His voice was just as flat and strange in print as it was in person. It was the voice of a man trying to describe something that had no available language. "I saw it coming. A second before. I don't know how. I just knew." 6 months after the accident, he took the job underground. I understood that differently now than I had when I first went down. And that led me to go back. I told him what I'd found. Dara said he thought I might have found that. I asked him if that's when it started, this particular sensitivity, this capacity for arriving a moment ahead of disaster. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me he didn't know. He didn't know if it had started with the accident, or if it had always been there, or if he was simply a man who noticed things a moment before others did, and the moments had grown longer, and what he noticed had grown larger, and he had come underground because underground was the only place where he might be useful. "I've been troubled in my mind," he said, "as to what I should do." His contract ended in 4 months. The transit authority was not renewing it. When he left, the booth would be fully automated. No human operator, no one watching the screens. The system flagged anomalies by algorithm, and in 11 years, the algorithm had never flagged camera 7, not once. If he left, and something appeared at the tunnel mouth, no one would see it. I asked what he should do. He told me he didn't know. I asked what I should do, with the whole story, with what I'd seen, with the 17 closed reports. He said that was my decision to make. He said he had made every decision available to him, and it hadn't been enough. Then the intercom bell rang. Not once, but 3 times. Slow and deliberate, as though each ring had been considered before it was delivered. Dara looked at camera 7. His face, which had been so carefully still through everything I had witnessed, went very quiet in a different way. It was the stillness of a man who had just been told something he already knew, but had been hoping not to hear it confirmed. He said it had never rung 3 times before. We both watched camera 7. Nothing. Just tunnel and red light, but nothing else. I stayed until midnight. Nothing happened on the line that night, so I went home. I told myself that it was a good sign. And later, I got the alert on my phone like everyone else had. There was a transit incident on the Deep Line. Service had been suspended. All passengers were advised to seek alternative routes. There was a brief automated apology for the inconvenience. I was already halfway there before I understood what I was running toward. The platform was taped off. 2 police officers, a transit authority representative with a clipboard, and the practiced calm of someone delivering bad news by rote. The booth was visible through the tape, the monitors still running. One screen was correct. Camera 7 was still glowing in the bottom right corner. They told me eventually, in the careful language of incident management, that Dara had left the booth at 5:12 that morning. They told me that operators are never, under any circumstances, supposed to leave the booth. He had walked into the tunnel mouth, and the camera had recorded him leaving. In the still frame they showed me later, when I filed a formal request, his hands were raised, his arms extended. The gesture was urgent and unmistakable. It was the same gesture the figure on camera 7 had made over and over for 11 years. He was hit by the early northbound at 5:14 a.m. The transit authority representative was already explaining: isolated worker, documented stress history, 17 reports in the file, all of it there, all of it seen, none of it acted on. He said it was a foreseeable tragedy. It was a procedural failure. But protocols were under review. I stopped listening to him. I looked at camera 7. The screen was cracked but still running, and static was crossing the image in slow waves. And there, at the edge of the red warning light in the tunnel mouth where Dara had walked and not returned from, was a figure. Standing still, not waving, not covering its face, just watching. I looked at the representative with his clipboard, at the officers with their protocols, at the 17 closed reports and the 6-year pending sensor gap and the algorithm that had never once flagged camera 7. I saw all the machinery of prevention that had not prevented. He had filed 17 reports. He had gone to the supervisor. He had gone to occupational health. He had told me all of it. But in the end, he had walked into the tunnel himself, the only thing he had left that he hadn't tried. The only warning he hadn't yet given. And something had happened anyway. I looked back at camera 7. The figure was still there, watching. I understood now what Dara understood. The warning doesn't fail. The warning is always delivered. The failure is what's ours. And there you have it, everyone. A story about warnings, isolation, and the unsettling truth that sometimes the greatest horrors aren't the ones we can see, but the ones we choose to dismiss. Remember, Charles Dickens wrote The Signalman just 1 year after surviving the tragic Staplehurst rail crash. It was an experience that stayed with him for the rest of his life. It's easy to remember Dickens for his unforgettable characters and stories of hope, but this tale reminds us that he was equally capable of exploring fear, fate, and the fragile line between the natural and the supernatural. Whether the figure in the tunnel was a ghost, a premonition, or simply the burden of one man's conscience is a mystery Dickens wisely leaves unanswered. Perhaps that's why the story still lingers with us today. And if you've enjoyed this modern reimagining, I'd be honored if you'd follow or subscribe to The Sounds of Stories. Please leave a review, let us know how we're doing, and share this episode with a friend or a loved one who also loves timeless literature brought to life. For more narrations by me, Bobby Garrison, please visit thesoundsofstories.com or click the link in the description. And thanks for spending your time here with us at The Sounds of Stories. Come back for another adventure. And remember, when the world seems to fade, the stories always remain.